Hey, hi everyone. How you doing? Yeah, let's turn down the music a little bit here. And yeah, welcome. So yeah, today I thought maybe a little different. Ooh, looks like I might be clipping. Just gonna turn the sound down just a bit. There we go. Yeah. Hopefully that won't be as harsh. Yeah, today I thought maybe a little bit different. I had a question come in a couple weeks ago or week and a half ago or so. And I thought, you know what? This really needs a bit more than just being reserved to the regular Q&A. I mean, and it's a fair question. We have to ask ourselves, is there a moral case for safety? And yeah, it is a good question. And we have to understand morality is all about what's right, okay? And the respect for human values and ethics, of course, are based on morality. Now, just to... Sometimes people use the two terms interchangeably, so let's just talk about this just for a sec. Morals refer mainly to the guiding principles, and ethics refer to the specific rules and actions or behaviors. And often we find that depending on their reward, people are often willing to take the risk. Say, for instance, a lot of headlines in the news recently, and well, our Prime Minister is constantly in the news for foregoing morals and breaching ethics, but same with a lot of elected officials. Now, we have to realize that obligations are based on, in the way of morals, that common societal code and expectations. So that's what sort of sets our moral compass. And the idea with health and safety is we look at the morality of no harm, health and safety being declared human rights, but how do they transfer into the workplace? And honestly, it's a super good question. It is. And it's one that constantly transcends a lot of conversations. So I thought what we would do is look at it today. But on that note, what we need to do is let's just quickly run over the chat rules. First off, number one, if you haven't subscribed yet, that's likely why you can't enter anything into the chat. So make sure you subscribe and then you can enter stuff into the chat. I find people sometimes subscribe and then check out, but that's okay. The idea is here more than anything else is to get your participation in the whole process. The channel is about collaboration, participation, and of course, promoting health and safety. So participate. Introductions are nice. Introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, what you do, even if you want to share your health and safety experience. Say, for instance, my name's Kevin Barrett. I'm from Calgary, Alberta. I'm a health and safety professional, and I've been playing this game in one way, shape, or another for almost 30 years. Maybe actually 30 years. So that's maybe a sample of what you might want to do and a bit about me. Now, the other thing is if the chat gets busy or there's stuff posted in the comments later and you want to weigh in, by all means do so. If a question's asked and you know the answer and you're absolute certain of it without any doubts, then you know what? Go ahead. Enter into it. It's fine. Your knowledge and your opinions count. But on that note, remember, let's be civil. No name calling, no insults. We didn't emerge from youth or from birth knowing health and safety and being experts. So the whole idea is, yes, by all means, share and collaborate, but be civil about it. And finally, the other thing to understand is this is not professional advice. There's no contracts being signed, there's no money changing hands, and it's not intended as professional advice. It's just intended as collaboration and an exchange of ideas. Okay? So by all means, I encourage your participation, and I want to hear from you, whether it be in the chat right now in real time or afterwards. You have thoughts and you have notion or more questions you want to ask, leave a comment. The other thing is go ahead, reach out to me through social media. A lot of people do reach out via Facebook or post something on Twitter. I don't check Twitter as much. Or use the email link that's found on the channel page of the YouTube channel, by all means. I want to know, and I want to know what you think, and I want to hear from you. So, just to bring this about, once again, got asked the question, can you explain the moral reasons for managing health and safety? And a couple of things to understand first off is that morality becomes that a question of a societal norm. Really and truthfully, like depending on your religious beliefs, your background, your cultural background, etc., some of that will influence your morals and some of the societal norms. Like none of us goes out and kills people because we know it's wrong. But in the same token, a lot of that transfers and affects health and safety. But there's some points to ponder here, okay? Immoral and unethical conduct can adversely affect the safety of workers. But not only that, it can trickle down and trickle out to the general public and the environment. So there's that little bit there. Now, usually if it's a law or requirement, a requirement for licensing, certification, insurance, or other reasons, that there's financial gain. Sometimes that financial gain is recognized through avoiding the loss. I'm just going to turn down the sound just a bit more. Looks like, yeah, I might be peaking a bit. Oh well. So a lot of times organizations will, these things will prompt employers to have things in place for processes to protect the safety of workers, right down to even harassment and bullying policies. Now, as far as legalities go, most will follow. Financially, many understand the risk of not following, especially when it's a legal requirement. But when it's a moral requirement, that's the transcending bit that we got to look at. And the thing is, the challenge lies with this following equation. Transgression plus evasion can equal profit. Pablo Escobar, and for those of you that don't know who I'm talking about, notorious drug cartel leader, and he said, everyone has a price. The important thing is to find out what it is. And so the truth is, everybody has their price. And often what happens is the attraction of not having to spend money on controls, of course, that money ends up in the pockets of those that are in control, those that run the business, those that have control of the cash. Oh, Dave, thanks for introducing yourself. Awesome. But when we get right down to it, part of the issue that we have is that temptation of, okay, if we can skirt the rules and we don't get caught, then it's almost like we've won. We've made something. And so the question needs to be asked, of course, and like there's always three reasons for managing health and safety. There's the legal reason. Then there's the financial reason, and then there's the moral reason. Unfortunately, what happens is a lot of people, without recognizing the moral reason, may not understand that there's a financial impact. And I ask you to stick with me because I'm going to share a real-world example towards the end here of this little bit of a presentation. The presentation's actually twofold. I got another little bit I want to talk about today as well. But we have to realize that all employers have a duty of care. In other words, they're responsible to look after the health and safety of the workers that are under their authority and control. Because we have to remember, when we're in a position of power, then that power, with that power comes duties and responsibilities. And So they have a duty to care for the employees or the workers under them. Okay, now we have to understand that workers will put their trust in employers. Now, when there's the problem is, and where we see issues coming and emerging, is there's often an acceptance in the business world, and I'm not saying all businesses and all organizations do this, but sometimes an acceptance, if you can skirt or break the rules in favor of profit, then sometimes it isn't looked upon as bad until there's that moral outcry and outrage, because what happens is you've betrayed the trust of workers or put their safety in jeopardy. But then the opposite question in the whole thing is how many employers go above and beyond in that care. Okay? Where they do, and I'm going to talk about this a bit more, so just stay tuned, where there's that duty to care, but they go above and beyond, not just because it's necessary, legally required, or financially required, but because it's the right thing to do. And often what happens is it actually becomes a bit more of a financial hit. Now, we have the understanding, and it's an inherent right in most OHS legislation across North America, is the workers have a right to a safe workplace. So then we have that right that gets in there as well. But once again, as the employer, when we're satisfying the right, have we done all that we can that's morally reasonable? And beyond that, and another thing that often people forget is there's a need to keep the public safe. A lot of times, and depending on the legislation, it'll say that they have the employers are required to protect the health and safety of all of those in the vicinity of the worksite. And a question when I teach that premise a lot of times is, well, what's the vicinity? Everywhere outside your work effects. So say, for instance, you're generating loud noise, and if you go 50 feet beyond the perimeter of your worksite and it's still generating 85 decibels, then you need to do something, because you're generating a lot of sound outside of your perimeters of your worksite that is detrimental to those that are around it. Same thing if there's dust and particulate moving out. I worked in a situation once where there was I had to provide some advisory capacity. There was a shop with mechanics and other workers, and then next door to it, there was another shop that was fabricating, and they were doing powder coating and spraying, and they were doing a lot of it outside. The overspray got on vehicles, and the funny thing is there's also people working outside in this area as well. And they were all mad about their vehicles, rightly so. Nobody wants their vehicles covered with powder spray and paint, and it's usually acidic based. But I asked the question, I said, when we're going through this, I said, how many of you thought about that getting into the makeup air units? How many of you thought about that you were inhaling it when you were outside working? And so there had to be a meeting, and then the group next door, what they did is they actually reversed their operations, and they got lighting, and they were doing that painting after hours, and they erected some barriers, etc. So there was stuff that was put in place. But the problem comes is that, was anybody being watchful of what was affecting outside the perimeter of that work site? Even though they're workers for another organization, they're not expected to deal with those hazards. So was a hazard assessment done, and was there controls and methods put in place to reduce those hazards to workers in the public? And so once again, just as a reminder, if you haven't done so already, you've got to subscribe if you want to enter into the chat. Now, the other thing that we want to look at is simply, there's a cost beyond money. A couple of things and the benefits that come from it when you're looking at the moral implications of your health and safety management. Are you going above and beyond? Are you considering all of the workers' in the situation, sometimes that return may not be realized for a while, but there is a return when you're looking at the moral cost. It was funny. I can remember a lumber manufacturer who, in their tree farm license area, what they did is they actually hired a person to be the road marshal and look after and stop and educate people when they're speeding too much, etc. But also to erect signage, and a lot of them were pictures of a worker, forest industry worker, holding their kids and says, "Look, I have something to go home to." Now, did they have to do it? Absolutely not. But this is a case where they made a moral investment and looked at the return. So sometimes it's the societal risk that gets the attention. Maybe what they did, excuse me, I'm not sure exactly of what was the motivating factor, but maybe what they did is they looked at what are we going to do if we have people injured or even worse, suffer a fatality because we could have done more to look after them? Okay? And so they looked at likely the societal risk. And that's the next thing. What are you willing to read in the news the next morning? What are you willing to say in front of a judge? What are you willing to tell your wife or husband and children? Okay, so we have to remember that we never underestimate the power of empathy and sympathy. When we're looking at managing and the moral reasons for managing that health and safety and managing risk is, what is society going to think about us? Okay? What is the impression that they're going to get? And once again, like I said, stay tuned. I have a real world example that I want to go through with you regarding this. Okay? And we have to understand that sometimes feelings can complement the facts. I've always said, and I've borrowed something from a conservative commentator, Ben Shapiro, is he always says facts don't care about your feelings. And he's absolutely right. Facts don't care about your feelings. However, when you get right down to it, feelings can complement facts. Okay? They can. So we have to remember that how the workers feel. Do they feel that they're protected? What is the public's impression of us? Do they feel that we can be trusted? Do they feel that we're worthy of doing the job? And there's a lot of organizations moving to the notion of how is that organization managing their society risk or their social risk before we hire them. Because we're hiring them, but it's us that people are going to read about in the news. So once again, there's more to the moral case for managing health and safety beyond just obeying the law and looking at the financial risk that you want to avoid. Andrew Carnegie said it well: do your duty and a little more, and the future will take care of itself. Okay? Do your duty and a little more, and the future will take care of itself. Thinking of it this way, that we have a duty of care, but if there's that opportunity to just go a little bit above and beyond with that duty of care, then realistically, things are going to look after themselves a bit better. So, if we're in that position of power, or we inadvertently wake up one day and find that we're in charge of more than just ourselves, we have to understand that there's a duty that goes beyond doing what our job description says. Often, what's required is we need to read between the lines. Sometimes, as health and safety professionals, what happens is we're forced to, or we're obligated to, or we have the responsibility to provide that advice and guidance to those that we're working for, our supervisors, our managers, our executives regarding that societal risk, regarding that social risk, regarding the moral imperative. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is we're giving the proper advice, but we're leading by example ourselves. And so, understand the social risks and its impacts. Okay? Remember I said those 3 gut checks. What are you willing to say in front of a judge? What are you willing to read in the news? And what are you willing to tell your loved ones? And often, when you reiterate that to someone else, it does have a bit of an impact. Outline all of the risks. Always start with the legal, the financial, but then never ever ignore the social risks, because the social risks are also what's going to outline that moral reason for managing safety. Excuse me. And I'll talk about how that's recognized in a bit, but be realistic. I've seen a case where there was guardrails around a large building, and people were shoveling off and clearing snow off of this building. And there were guardrails around there. And we know that as far as fall protection goes, guardrails are the number one. Well, number one is not being up there, of course, but guardrails are number one. And the amount of people that were safety professionals that were weighing in and saying that these people should have had fall restraint, in other words, restricting their travel, or fall protection, harnesses, lanyards, anchor points, etc., was amazing. Now, did that property owner, employer, whatever, do and follow their duty of care according to the law? Absolutely. Yes, they did. Did they have any financial risks? Not really, because there was guardrails to protect the people. However, was that moral and societal risk with the amount of people that were misinformed, that were saying that the employer or the building owner was not obeying the law? What they could have done is, yes, looked after some sort of a restraint and travel process that would have gone above and beyond, but it also would have cared for that moral risk. Once again, what are you willing to read in the news the next morning? Always, when you're outlining this, share real-world examples. But also, be realistic and look at the cost, okay? If it's going to cost $10,000, $20,000 to implement these things, what are the risks? What is the risk if you've done everything you're supposed to do legally, financially, and somebody has this misrepresentation in the news? What is your risk? So yes, you have to do a bit of risk management. It's essential. And time again, it's funny that we often will be busy. Part of our job is defending someone else's ignorance, especially as safety professionals. The answer I always get, or the question or the rebuttal I always get when I put something forward is, well, what are the chances? Or why do we have to do this? Look, we've never had to do it before. And hey, I understand all of this, and the chances may be minimal. However, you still want to assess that risk and understand that risk, and take those steps to morally manage safety beyond the legal and financial. So it's up to you as the safety professional. Find those easy and doable solutions. In many cases, you might have to provide one or two to the employer. But when you're doing that, another way is always remember, 2 heads are better than one, many heads are better than one, or use the hive mind. Talk to your workforce, talk to your coworkers, and talk to the safety committee. Okay? And if everybody's behind you and they're looking at it or as a thing we need to do, then maybe it'll get done. Or in some cases, it might be looked at as a non-issue. Okay, a non-issue. The other thing is, if you're in a union environment, shop stewards, don't feel that you can't approach them and ask their opinion as well and get their input on it. And the big thing is to allow time for change. Changing attitudes requires usually a deep shift in ingrained behaviors. And these behaviors have often, they're a result from exposure to a culture, an environment, and a lot of times it works in reverse. People may come from a different country or a different locale, usually it's a different country, where the culture and the laws there, occupational health and safety isn't something that's looked at as much, or it's one of those things we do on paper. And so there often will have an ingrained behavior because of that long-term exposure to that culture and environment. So you have to allow time for change. I find a lot of times too, especially when there's cross-jurisdictional stuff, when people are coming from different provinces, etc., where the behavior, not just the legalities and the legislation, but the behavior and what's acceptable is different, okay, as far as health and safety goes. So a lot of times there has to be that discussion and working towards it to find common ground and finding a way to overcome this. Now, the other thing that we have to remember is safety does not produce bountiful virtue signaling points, okay? I ran into a situation once. Well, I've run into it a few times in similar situations, but once where there was the moral imperative about dealing with working alone and the amount of people in an organization that were working in isolation alone and having to address it and how it's dealt with, but it was pushed aside for upcoming Pride Week. Now, understandably, I understand. We all want to address the concerns of others. But what's more important? Okay? And you know what? Anybody's proclivities, I'm not questioning anything. But what's in the level of importance here? The amount of workers that are working alone in isolation and could be imperiled and unable to get help, or the arrangements for Pride Week. So, you know, once again, it's just safety a lot of times doesn't have, how should we say, bountiful virtue signaling points. But there are more than just bad apples. Okay, there are employers going above and beyond. And I'm going to try and do it here. I'll just put it in the chat. And hopefully the link will go through. And looks like my restriction that I put in place for no links in the chat, I'm not even allowed to override it. So what you can do is go to, and I'll put the links in afterwards. Oh no, it did go into the chat. Look at that. Awesome. Safestemployers.com. And there is awards and recognition for employers that are going above and beyond. In fact, there's a methodology process for selecting those people and those employers that and organizations that deserve that recognition. So there is a process, and there is those employers out there that go above and beyond. But some of them don't necessarily get put forward for recognition. So whether you're watching this right now and in the chat, or you're watching it afterwards because I'm presenting when it's like 3 o'clock in the morning in your place in the world, let me know in the comments. Let me know about employers that you've encountered that have gone above and beyond, because I want to hear about it, because realistically, I know they're out there. They're a long time ago, when I was first starting down this road, we're going to call it the late 80s, you know what? I called them Sasquatch employers because realistically, I worked in a resource-based industry. I was a logger, and a lot of times this stuff was foreign to us. The culture was not there. No risk, no gain. And so as the years go by, though, things change. And now there is lots of employers out there who aren't bad apples, shall we say. So please, if you're watching this afterwards, comment and let me know. I'd appreciate it. I want to hear about those employers that are going above and beyond. Now, a real-world example. And in fact, it's an unreal example. So what I'm going to do is just, and I'll post the link to the different websites in the chat afterwards. But let me tell you a background about this story. And now this is about a worker. He was 49. He was born in Albania, came to Canada in 2017. And now he initially found work for a paving company, and it was off the books because he didn't have a work permit. So he was a landed, he wasn't even, I guess he'd be a landed immigrant, but he didn't have permanent resident status. He didn't have the ability to work. He needed a work permit. Now, when he went to work for this company, he didn't like his supervisor because he found the supervisor harsh, and the supervisor made, he swore at him and was profane and made undesirable comments. So now, in November of 2018, the supervisor left the paving company. Now, I want you to remember 2018 because I don't know why the supervisor decided to leave, but I'll share something else that occurred in 2018 with this company as well when we're moving through the story. And like I said, I'll share the links afterwards. So the supervisor joined a company, Universal Structural Restorations Limited, USRL. A building restoration company, and they're based out of Concord, Ontario. Now, he asked the worker if he'd come join him. I don't know why the worker did, but maybe he painted a really good story. And the worker agreed because, you know, he thought he might not necessarily have to work for that supervisor, might be able to work with others. Now, the worker started off the books with USRL, but the company did discuss getting him a worker permit. So that's awesome. Now, of course, the worker must have been a decent worker because other supervisors asked if he could join in, and the supervisor that hired him said no. He didn't want him to leave his crew. And when the worker suggested he would be willing to go wherever the organization wanted him to go, the supervisor swung his fist and hit him in the testicle, and it knocked him to the ground. Now, he reported it to a manager, and the manager, to the worker's knowledge, didn't do anything. So, I mean, the name calling and the assault and battery, really and truthfully, they didn't do anything, which was strange. Now, unfortunately, the worker didn't seek medical attention because he didn't have an Ontario health card. And he took lots of painkillers. He also said that he was having difficulty having sex. And he was married, or is married. And he pursued it. Why? Because he ended up getting a work permit that was tied to USRL in January of 2019. Now, even going further, this supervisor, who is a irreparable human being, or I shouldn't say that, everybody's redeemable, but a terrible human being, the supervisor asked the worker to perform unpaid renovation work at his home as payback for helping him get a work permit. The worker went and did it. And the worker saw a doctor in April of 2019 to get treatment for the damaged testicle. And there was no treatment that could be done. He had to get it removed. He sent pictures of his surgical scar to his supervisor. His supervisor's response was terrible. And the worker ended up falling off a ladder at work. He was in a lot of pain and asked for an ambulance, but the USRL and management didn't want to call one because they couldn't afford another workers' compensation claim. Stay tuned. There's more to this story. I feel like Paul Harvey, and now you know the rest of the story. But anyway, they also, USRL told the worker not to report the injury to Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, which is in Ontario. They're like their workers' compensation board, and suggested that he tell the doctors that he fell down the stairs at home. The company later prepared a report stating the worker did not request an ambulance. It gets worse. Now, the company was clearly trying to avoid a claim, and that didn't work out well. In January 2020, the supervisor started calling the worker names again. The worker tried to transferred, but ended up back under the supervisor yet again. And he started calling him names again. In fact, said he would punch him in the other testicle and take care of his wife for him. No matter what, it just seemed to be that the employer ignored the situation. And because they were ignoring the situation, it sort of emboldened that supervisor just to carry on with the continual torture, mental torture of this worker. And often, there you go, there's that moral imperative. Now, the worker went and decided, that's it, I'm going to quit, filed, gave them the employer his notice, and left. And then he decided that he was going to sue the employer, and rightly so. He ended up being awarded a total of $300,000, and some of them were $100,000 for the tort of battery and $10,000 for the tort of assault. A tort is a wrongful doing towards a person and a wrongful action. Battery, remember, is the actual bodily harm. Assault is that threat of the harm. And so if you make a motion towards a person, that's assault. You actually hit them and cause damage, that's battery. And look it up. That's my knowledge towards it. The supervisor ended up having to pay $25,000 for the tort of battery. As far as I'm concerned, he should have been legally charged. Now, although they had a harassment policy in place, because it's often a requirement, it's a legal requirement, and depending on where you are, if you want to get certificate of recognition, it's an absolute requirement of that certification. Sometimes with certain insurances, it's also a requirement that you have our violence, harassment, and bullying policies in place. But the company did it, but it was, once again, we do that on paper. Excuse me. Now, just a little bit more on this. As reported in July of 2018, in the Daily Commercial News, and once again, I'll leave links in the description when I'm done here, Universal Structural Restoration, based out of Concord, Ontario, was convicted after a worker was killed in a genie boom fall. Wow. So, this happened in August of 2016, but it often takes a long time for these cases to work their way through the courts. The important thing to remember is this is quite possibly what was hanging over their head. Or the next thing I have to wonder is, was this something that was just part of the whole entire puzzle? Was there other smaller claims, and was it to the point that they were going to reach their breaking point? So, we have to remember that you as a worker, or you as a safety professional, you have that ability to make anonymous complaints. However, once again, remember, the size of the organization. And sometimes, I know we all hear about those employers who end up broke and penniless after this or whatever. You know what? Sometimes when people are able to skirt the law and achieve a profit, they get what they want. But then you have to remember, when you get what you want, sometimes you get what you deserve. So you can also ask authorities having jurisdiction to come write orders, come investigate, come inspect, etc. You have that right. You also have that right as a worker, and you as a safety professional should be constantly reminding workers under your care that they have that right to a healthy and safe workplace. And also remember your network. Go get advice somewhere on how to pursue this. And no matter what, make sure your resume is up to date. Because honestly and truthfully, no matter how much we try, we will run into these situations where we've done the right thing, we've reported, and we end up on the unemployment line. Yes, you do have that ability to go and recover and sue and make complaints, etc. But once again, the litigation takes time, and it's unfortunate. But that time also works in two reasons. Number one, it is to ensure that the right thing is done. Remember, we're talking about the right thing, and also protection for the employer against frivolous complaints. Now, on this note, let's switch gears. Okay, our ethics. Let's talk about our ethics. Okay, for just as something to do. And what brought it up to the forefront is just recently, I did a video on OpenAI on ChatGPT, and I got it to write a sample health and safety policy, pardon me, not health and safety policy, but safe work procedures. And I got it to write actually a couple of them. I got it to write one on, and if you haven't seen the video, I'll leave a link in the description. I got it to write a simple one on step ladders, because we all have to do that. We all have to do these simple ones to get our feet wet when we're doing our certificate programs or our degree programs, etc. And I had to do one on step ladders. So you know what? I just wanted to see if I could do it. And it didn't do a bad job. Not perfect. There's some things I would have added to it. But it did a pretty good job. So I decided, okay, let's up our game and get it to go into a steel container. And those of us that are safety professionals and or knowledgeable know that entering a steel container, you're entering a possibility of a deprived oxygen environment, because steel rusts and it pulls oxygen out of the environment. So if we move into that enclosed space, that confined space, we run the risk of not having enough oxygen. It did a pretty good job because it actually wrote a confined space entry procedure. Not nearly as good as it should, but certainly something to start with. And then I got it to write one for BC, just for fun. And I won't give away anything more on that. I'll let you go watch the video. But the whole thing to what I'm saying here is that it can do some of our job. So I just want to ask the question, has anybody tried it out yet? Let me know in the comments. If you've tried it out or done anything towards it, have you got it to write safe work procedures or policy or anything else like that? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And the reason I want to talk about this more is even Google is starting and developing one of their own that's going to be released. Well, they've been developing, and it's going to be released fairly soon. And it's called Apprentice Bard. And there's going to be more from the big conglomerates. I imagine Microsoft will have more stuff out. I imagine that Apple's going to enter into the foray. Everybody will. So, yeah, it's going to become more and more the norm. But there's some warnings here. Okay? It's okay to use it. Use it as a springboard. We've all borrowed from the hard work of others. Okay? A lot of us have done it in the past. But always, no matter what, we give credit where credit is due. I've used other health and safety, safe work procedures or policy or whatever to springboard me on my own. And I've footnoted it and made sure that those that designed the original one, especially when I'm using a significant part of it, are recognized. Okay? The other thing is it's really good. One of the comments that was left in the video is a non-native speaker will use it to get a start. But if you're new to the safety game, say that you're not a safety professional, you're tasked with health and safety, and you've got to do this. You've got to write safe work procedures, or you've been put upon to write safe work procedures or a health and safety policy or something. You know what? It's a good thing. It is. It likely looks very attractive. In fact, I'll likely use it myself for doing a few more things. And especially it's a time saver when you're stuck for time. And think about points 1 and 2. And you know what? I want to talk more about that time saver in just a little bit. But then there's the ethical dilemma. Okay? Remember, always give credit where credit is due. If you're passing off another's work as your own, it's certainly not a good thing, and it's not going to do you any favors as a health and safety professional. It's not. Okay? Because no matter what, all the time, one of your main things that you want to be doing as you're working for your employer or being a consultant is always invest in your credibility. Do it by banking those ethical and moral points all the time. And if you're passing off another's work as your own, you're going to lose. Okay? So, no matter what. Okay? Now, a couple of other things to think about. Treat it like any other safety document. Okay, once you've fed the question into the AI and you're going to decide, well, let's get it to write a safe work procedure. And you've gone to that work of getting it to write a safe work procedure. And now, what do we do? Well, it's pretty simple, and I've talked about it with other videos. Get the appropriate worker input, okay? If you're writing a safe work procedure, and let's just say you're writing it, and I'll just steal for my example, step ladders. Then all of the workers that are going to be using step ladders, or maybe not all of them, maybe 50%. I don't know how many work for your organization. Let's say that you have 6 workers that are going to be using a step ladder. Maybe at least get 3 of them to review it, have a look at it, and tell you what they think. Okay? Now, there's another piece. Don't forget the safety committee. Okay? They should be providing you that assistance and being that other set of eyes. And whether they're, it's part of what their normal modus operandi is, I'm hoping that they will be acting as stewards to your health and safety program or your health and safety management system, that they will be providing input. Then you should be passing it through them and also telling them, hey, I got ChatGPT to write this. I didn't have a lot of time. I know your time is valuable too as well. So I thought rather than us writing it from the start, let's just take this and springboard it. Or either or, just say, I got this, them to write it. Can you give me any input on it? Okay. Now, this helps you to avoid that moral dilemma because realistically, it's a big thing. And I know that we're going to see it more and more. I would not be surprised if the BCRSP starts looking at that as part of their morals and ethics program that we're all required once we become certified as CRSPs to take. Yeah, so no matter what, it's okay to get the AI to do these things for you. It is. But don't claim it as your own, and make sure that you read it over and check it and make sure that you weigh it against a best practice process. Okay? Because time and time again, we're going to see it where people are going to call it their own work. Okay? And it's not their own work. We won't be able to spot it. They will eventually get better systems out there where we can spot AI work. But you know what? That's the idea behind AI. They learn. Okay? The idea is supposed to be learning, self-learning, getting wiser. And so when they're learning, they'll likely be learning how to skirt that stuff too. Okay? Yeah. So if you like the live stream, let me know. I'd really enjoy a like. I would. It's not that I go fishing for them and I'm not insecure, but I'd enjoy a like. Now, so this brings us to this time. Does anybody have any questions about what we've done? And remember, once again, if you haven't done so yet and you're just joining, subscribe and enter into the chat if you want. But it's about asking questions. Okay? So I'll give it a few minutes, but I'm pretty much done on that note. I'd also like you to consider a few things and maybe let me know in the comments. I'd like to be able to add to the live stream. What did you think about that story of the bad operator and using it as an example? Would you like to hear more about a wrap-up at the end of the bi-weekly session about those things? Accidents occur in the workplace, but I don't like to talk about ones that are just reported instantly in the news, because basically what we're doing is we're doing the investigation through the media and the news, and that's not something that should be done. We're not supposed to form an impression and a verdict through what we read in the news. It's supposed to be done by the professionals. But what did you think about that? What about workplace fails, outlandish non-compliance pictures? And if you do find some, by all means, send me links or send the pictures via social media or whatever. I'd appreciate it. Also, if you want to talk about any upcoming legislative changes or other changes to OHS related stuff, beyond incidents and mishaps, by all means, let me know if you'd like to see that in the live stream as well. Because it's about us and our collaboration, more so than anything else. Yeah. It doesn't look like any questions are coming into the chat. And the funny thing is they usually come in comments afterwards, in videos afterwards. So, yeah, there we go. I won't keep you much longer. I will turn the music up, and yeah, if there's any other questions, I'm gonna maybe another minute or so, and then I'm gonna sign off. But do me a favor, as you're headed out there, be a leader, be a safety leader, be an influencer, provoke safety. Don't just talk about it, don't just think about it, lead by example. In other words, don't stand on a chair, get a stepladder. Wear that eye protection when you need to. Wear that other PPE as you need to. And look after your PPE and make sure you change it out. All those sort of things, especially if you're a safety professional. Oh, thanks, Dave. I will start looking at how I'm going to incorporate that. The other thing is, I'm likely going to be going down to just videos alternating between the live streams, because I want to make sure that I have good quality for you guys. And so trying to churn out one every week is the quality is going to suffer. It is. So I want to start doing just one video and then a live stream, video, live stream, etc. If I have the ability to do more for whatever reason, I've had a really light week, then by all means you can look forward to some. But in most cases, reality is that's the schedule you're going to see. Anyway, yeah. Thanks for joining. Take care. Yeah. Bye for now.